what has struck me is that the sort of, oh well, we better not talk about Europe too much sort of mode across a range of politicians, except perhaps the Green Party. It contrasts so sharply with how Nigel Farage, a rather unlikely character, became so successful in bringing about what he wanted to do. He kept on plugging away regardless, and despite all his ups and downs, and many downs were amongst those ups and downs, he kept on pushing at it. But there isn't the same thing on our side. Valerie and I attended a meeting at which Daisy Cooper, the deputy leader of the Lib Dems, was present, and she was talking about initially about the poor international situation, and then focusing with questions from the floor more on domestic things. But afterwards, I asked her about Europe and why they, just like other parties, just try not to say anything about it. And she said, well, maybe not this coming election, but the election after. It just strikes me that the one lesson one can learn from Nigel Farage is you just keep on pushing.
Yes, I mean, I completely agree. I think actually, in a sense, like what we require is a kind of Farage-like character. I'm always struck, I mean, on the point you made, I'm always struck, Dan Hannan tells this story about how in 2009, he rang up Tory HQ and said, and he spoke to one of the campaign managers there. This is when he was an MEP, and he said, I'm going to be, just so you know, I'm going to be going against the party line, and I'm going to be advocating full full leaving of the European Union, and I'm going to be doing it, and I'm going to be dedicated to this, and this is my thing. And they all laughed at him. Apparently, this is what he says, and actually, I can believe it, that they all laughed at him. And you only have to think that it was only 7 years later that we had a referendum and voted to leave. So it's incredible. Like, these things can happen incredibly quickly, I guess. I mean, I was surprised. Like, I'm genuinely surprised by the inertia in Westminster around this. It's really it's quite a thing. It's really difficult because, as you say, I mean, even the Lib Dems don't really want to talk about it, and it becomes, and it's like there's no. I mean, like, ironically, the thing that helped Farage that we don't have is he had European elections. So he could, he could become an MEP, and then he was an elected official. So that got him on television, etc. Also got them some money, also got them some notice, also meant that they were in Brussels and they could talk to other anti-EU groups. Like, we sort of don't have that. So that's the real trick, I guess. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we need, actually, because actually what then happens if you had a sort of pro-European Farage type, like someone who just, that was their single issue, and they talked about it, and they were on, Question Time all the time or whatever. What you would then get is, well, just like what you had with the Tories, right, where they had to sort of respond to Farage eventually and had to worry about him. If Labour really had to worry about a genuine pro-European split off, even if it was like 10, like, again, like UKIP numbers, somewhere between 10 and 15%, they couldn't really live with that. They'd have to figure out something. They'd have to, and I think without that, it's tough to see them changing anytime soon. Depressing, but yeah. So I completely agree.
My question to you is: have you got any suggestions to add to the put in the melting pot that would help reach out beyond the bubble?
A big one is for the European movement to decide what it wants to be and decide what it wants to achieve. It's in a great position, given some of the people who are involved in its status and all that sort of stuff, to be, the prime campaigning group for this. And I think a lot of people expect it to be that and want it to be that. And I think my experience of the organization in terms of the senior, like the people who have been CEOs, the people who have been chairs, the people at the top, has not been that at all. Has been, we actually don't want this. A classic as I told you about, being banned from Tory conference, that was gold. I mean, that was absolute gold. Again, was mentioned about Farage. One of the things Farage made so much hay over was being banned from Tory conference. That was gold. He used that so effectively. He would hold for ages. Farage was banned from Conservative conference, and he used to every year, and I'd go to it because they were always fascinating events. He would hold an event like as close to the secure zone as he possibly could, and all the media would be there. He'd have a huge crowd of people. Like they were like genuinely like they were like they were like fascist rallies or something. These things, they were insane. Like you'd have people all in UKIP, talk like 1,000 people going Nigel, 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 and he used that being banned from Tory conference so effectively, and it was just so depressing to me that it but again, that's something a hard campaigning group would do. That's looking for you. It's like you have to fight every corner as viciously as you possibly can do, and just almost have the mentality of like this is going to go away. Our whole if we don't watch it, our whole sort of reason to exist could disappear. We have to fight for every column inch, every moment, every time we have to be on TV as much as we can do. We have to be in the, wherever we can. We have to be in the media as much as we can. We have to be there all the time. And I just feel like it's not that the organization is thinking of doing those things and is doing it badly. I think the disconnect and the problem is that they're not thinking about doing it. They don't. It's like there's no sort of thought of that being the European movement's role. And so that would be my main thing is like if the European movement just switched into so I'll give you, so I actually went for the CEO job and I didn't get shortlisted, and I completely know why. I was quite provocative in the long list interview, and I basically said, like, well, if I only want to do this if you want to turn this into a campaigning organization. If you want to look at this as like I would be looking at like taking this job, and 10 years from now we've won a referendum and we're back in the European Union, and that is I'm going to work to that time scale every day, and that is the whole ethos of the organization revolve around that, and it was not well received at all. I mean, I could just tell it was not, that it just wasn't, it wasn't where they wanted to go with it. And fair enough. And actually, I'm glad they didn't shortlist me for that reason. Like, I'm glad I didn't actually have to do an additional interview that was a waste of my time. So, but yeah, I just think like, is that what they want to do or not? And my experience is no. And if you and others within the National Council want the European movement to do that, then the organization has to change to become that, if that makes sense.
I'm just wondering what's going to happen in the near future, because we've got more controls on food imports and more controls on people moving between those between the EU and the UK, and also we got this problem of military action in the EU, and I just wonder if people wake up to the fact that it is a peace project, and we do really need urgently to work together. Do you think that's true? Do you think people will wake up to it?
I think people are going to wake up sooner in terms of the positive, seeing the EU as this very positive structure. It's about peace and etc. I think that's further down the line, sadly. I think that probably what's much more likely in the next 5 years is Rejoin creeps up the polls from 60 to 65, maybe high 60s, maybe even 70. And actually, I feel like I can say, well, maybe 70, because I would never have thought we'd be on 60 now. So maybe we'll be on 75, God knows. But weirdly, with the issue having as much salience possibly as it does now. So sort of the only time Brexit's talked about is when there's some new Brexit thing that's coming in that's bad, or the pints of wine rubbish, or what the Daily Express does, like as in the conversation about Europe not changing very much in Britain, despite everything else, and it getting less popular for a combination of things, which are fairly obvious. One, as it becomes obvious that there are downsides to Brexit, and those downsides begin to feel felt, combined with the fact that obviously Brexit didn't solve anything, which actually I think Brexit is really discount people's feelings on that. That they'd sold this to people as this great solution, and just saying, well, it wasn't as bad as the Remainers said. It actually, whether that's true or not, is not that's not enough. And demographics, obviously. Younger people, are just reflexively anti-Brexit. It sort of shocks me, actually, how it's not even something they really think about particularly. And if you ask them why they think Brexit's bad, they're like, well, it's just bad. It just sucks. And it's become a cultural thing. So my daughter's 12, and in her class, Brexit is a pejorative adjective. So if someone has really beat up football boots, they're called Brexit boots. Or if someone's like, oh, it's a Brexit, Brexit's just so in a sense, they're growing up in this culture where Brexit's just taken as this negative. We're seeing it from the polling, people 18-year-olds now, it's 77-23 or whatever, Rejoin. So the mixture of those two things, I just think we don't, as we've talked about everything that we've talked about already, we don't have a Farage figure, or there's no obvious Farage figure coming through. Also, I don't even know where that would come from, because I don't know where the funding for that, the sort of this. It's like we haven't even got to a point where there's enough people in Westminster who are going, Jesus, we really need a Farage figure, if you see what I mean. So that's a real problem. And I just worry that I'm starting to get worried that we're just going to drift a little bit over the next few years. As in, Rejoin keeps going up and keeps becoming more popular, but there's nothing within the political sphere. There's nothing within Labour or the Conservative Party that really changes particularly. I mean, changing the Conservative Party, I think, is something that's needed, and who knows? I sometimes think, well, maybe what could happen is the moderate wing of the Conservative Party sort of becomes at least sort of pro-single market, whatever. But then I take a step back, and the problem with the Conservative Party really is the membership. The membership have just gone completely gaga over the last decade. I mean, it's got really bad. It's really, really, and whether that's entryism from UKIP members, I don't know. But every Tory MP is now absolutely terrified of their associations. Terrified, all of them, other than the properly right-wing nut jobs who are that's fine. They're, John Hayes or something, I'm sure gets along perfectly with this association. But, if you're in any way a sort of slightly thinking person, they're just you just have no idea. Nuts. When someone will say something completely nutty in the press, and you're going, what? And then I'll see them somewhere, and I'll be like, what was that crap about? What? They're just I have to do it. I have to do it for my association, because if I don't, I have to every once in a while say something about Easter eggs or something mad, because otherwise I'll be up for reselection. And they put Truss in, and frankly probably would have, if even after that disastrous, whatever it was, 45 days or whatever, if they'd gone back to the membership and it was Truss Sunak, I'm pretty sure Truss would have won again.
Yeah, I'm sure. On the topic of politics, I'm a member of the Liberal Democrat Party, and I am really disappointed in the fact that they are not doing anything to promote going back into the EU. And in fact, there seems to be a level of ignorance about the issues as well. I was very surprised, because somebody I know who's a parliamentary candidate didn't know what Erasmus was and what was the effect on young people. And I thought, goodness me. Anyway, very disappointed.
No, one of the things that's always interesting to me about conversations around Europe, going back to 2010 and before, was how much ignorance there was about the EU and what it does and what it doesn't do. Everybody brings up the Nadine Dorris, she didn't know what the customs union was, but actually there were a lot of MPs that applied to, who just didn't know anything about the EU structures at all. And on both sides, but actually more prominently on the Leave side, just people who just didn't really understand what the EU was. And be saying, oh, the EU's a dictatorship and it does blah blah blah, and then you just be like, well, and then you get into any technical, when I say technical, I don't even mean really technical stuff. Just as in you're talking about the basic EU institutions and what they do, and they just have no idea, no real idea. And so I'm not surprised that there's ignorance. I think on the point you were making about the Lib Dems, I mean, to me, it just seems very obvious what Ed Davey has decided to do. And that is, he's basically decided that the seats that are up for grabs for him are probably, they're either in the Southwest, they're in the London commuter belt, and maybe there's something in Scotland. And he feels like, other than Scotland, which is the most distant one anyway, and probably least least dependent on anything the Lib Dems actually do or say, as in they might get them because the SNP vote collapses somewhere or what have you.
The reason is they've got no money.
Yeah, they've got no money.
And politics is becoming much too dependent on who's got the money, which is well, it's not very democratic, is it? Anyway.
No, and I agree. And I think Ed's come up with a thing which is basically like, these are the areas that we can get. These people don't want us to talk about Brexit. We're going to mostly run on broadly sort of NIMBYism, and that's what's going to get us 30 seats or 40 seats or whatever, dependent on how badly the Tory vote collapses. And, politically, just on purely politically, it's not the worst political strategy. I get it.
Is there a way of speeding up things by going for the arguments around economic growth and productivity improvements? I mean, I would have thought that Labour should be fairly receptive to, if one wants to do the things that it needs to be done in this country, and there's such reluctance to increase taxes, then it means economic growth is the way forward. And surely that is inextricably linked with getting back into the single market and possibly a customs union. Isn't there a step-by-step process of moving towards EU membership through the single market?
It's a good question, but I mean, I'm not really sure. There was a point at which I thought that was a possibility. I'm less sure now. I was very much signed on to we'll probably, join step by step. I'm not so sure now. In terms of Labour and the economic argument, I mean, you're completely right. And actually, one of the things that Labour is going to be desperate to do if they win the election, which they almost certainly will be to do something for business, get business to support them in a more broad way so that they can think about that going into the election after that. I think the problem is they're just so terrified of being in any way pro-European. I mean, they're absolutely terrified. And I think they would need to feel like that had been neutralized for them and it wasn't going to be an issue and they weren't going to lose massive amounts of seats because for that. I mean, it's very possible that they wouldn't now anyway, but they're not convinced of that, and they desperately don't want this election to be about Brexit. And it'll be interesting to see what happens to Labour when they get in. Just to finish on that point, I think the one thing I would say about the economic argument is one of the things that's always come from pro-Europeans is the economic argument, and it's very solid, and actually has never really been effectively countered. Not by anybody particularly credible. However, it's never really particularly worked either. As a campaigning tool, it just hasn't worked. I think that's one of the reasons why there's a sort of a slight well, we tried this, we said you'd be poorer off, we said you'd be worse off, we said you do this, we said you do that, we said we'd lose this. And actually, you marry that with the fact that the Brexiters said, oh, we'll still be part of some trading arrangement from Iceland to Russia or whatever. None of that actually happened. Even still, somehow those arguments don't cut through. So I think that's the problem with the economic argument.
I was saying, as a journalist, where are we going to find someone who can lead, who isn't in Westminster? Where are we going to find someone who can talk to people who don't read The Guardian or The Times, who doesn't use words of 15 syllables, and apparently knows it from back to front? We don't have a Matthew Elliott. We don't have a Dan Hannan. We don't have Dom Cummings, and I wish we did. I wish he was on our side because he won it in many ways, didn't he?
Agreed.
We don't have a Farage. So where is this irritant? Where is this person? If I could persuade Rory Stewart, he would be the person I would say we should have as our leader.
Yeah.
But retired politicians, they're not going to do it. The public, the general public, do not talk about Brexit. I mean, I haven't had a conversation with anyone apart from members of the European movement or whatever about Brexit for many, many months because the public is simply not interested.
Yep.
And where is that fire? Where is that irritant who's going to come forward? Any ideas? I've no ideas at all, really.
Here's what I would do, and that's one of the reasons I was so I was so adamant about the European movement thing is if you're looking at so I've been around it a little bit. Just for background, I wrote for the Spectator for a few years. I actually know a lot of the prominent Brexit people. Like I know Matthew Elliott really well. Yeah. So basically, it's really well structured. It's really well exactly well to achieve it. And we don't have that. And like why you don't have that on our side is a difficult one. But it's like a culture change that needs to shift. Like, I mean, I genuinely version of Tufton Street. I know exactly how to do it. But it's just getting people to listen. Because I think there's a real kind of everybody. I think the thing about it, what you have in Westminster is everybody's very cozy with where they are at the moment. Everybody's like, I know this sounds weird, but everybody's just very happy. Like you allude to Rory Stewart. The reason Rory Stewart doesn't want to do it is he's writing books and he's doing a podcast that's listened to by millions of people and he's having a great old time. Like why does he want to throw himself into this debate that's like going to be really toxic, to be really brutal? Like you have to want to do it so badly to bother doing it. And I mean, I know lots of Tories who are genuinely would stick their head up more about it. I'm not saying they'd be like a Farage figure, but they would talk about it a lot more. But like Tobias Ellwood, he did that thing about how we should join the single market, and he just sort of felt like he was just fluttering in the wind a bit, sort of like, oh, he kind of thought that, there'd be some movement that would kind of, I don't know, fill in behind him, and like it didn't happen. And he was like, oh, okay. And I think a lot of other people have looked at it and gone, yeah, let's not do that. So it's changing the weather, but also I think in order to do that, I just think there just needs to be more of an organization thing. I think people come back to like, oh, you want to have a Farage, you want to have a Matthew, you want to have these figures, but like on our side, you need a professional. It just needs to be way better organized and way better thought about, and way more. Just go. We want to achieve these goals. It's like, as I was saying, when I have talked to people and I've said, I want to do a thing where we start something and we say, in 10 years, we're going to be back in the EU. Let's work with that in mind. And it just freaks them out. They just go, oh, I don't know about that. It's like, it's a kind of, so I think that's the biggest thing that probably needs to change. I think there's too much of a, let's float along for now. Like the Leafs side, you're looking at the warm up to 2016. They were really organized. They were seriously organized. They were the biggest thing that could have blown it apart was the difference. There was a real schism between the Tory types like Matthew and then Farage and that group, and they kind of hated each other. They managed to actually get over that and bridge that gap, and that was the only thing really stopping them. And then once that was done, then they were like, they were a really, a brutal campaigning machine. And it's again, I just don't feel like it's not that we're campaigning wrong. I just don't even think we're campaigning at the moment. Not at a national level, not at a Westminster level. Anyway, Chris,
neither do we have access to the kind of money that they had access to.
Absolutely, I totally agree. So that is a big weakness, as I was saying. Farage he was an MEP, he had all that. We don't have that. It's big. I agree.
Do you feel that electoral law will be any stronger next time round? Because I mean, they pulled so many tricks financially.
No, I don't think it will be. I mean, I actually know quite a bit about electoral law because I've been involved in a few campaigns and I've done a few electoral return campaigns at national level, and I can tell you, basically, the whole flaw in the thing from a referendum perspective is that it's all built around. They've basically mapped the law from general elections, and then just shoved it into the referendum stuff, and just changed whatever they absolutely had to. The problem with that being, by very definition, you promise a whole bunch of stuff. You're a political party, right? You promise a whole bunch of stuff. Either you get elected, and then the electorate will want you to deliver on it, right? And if you don't, they will vote you out next time, or you don't get elected. And actually, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. The problem with referendums is you have campaigning groups that only exist for the referendum, and they can just say whatever they want because it doesn't, like, as soon as the referendum's over, they're gone. Doesn't matter. And this is a problem I have talked about so many times. I've talked about it with the Electoral Commission, and they just don't listen, and they somehow don't get it. And it seems to me a really obvious point, but they don't get it. So I would suggest if there's another referendum, it will be under pretty much the same laws.